Billionaire asked a woman who lost her baby to feed his newborn, and knew she was his childhood love. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from, and once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now sit back and enjoy every detail. The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital cast harsh shadows across Lucian Thorne's face as he paced the sterile corridor. At 39, he was accustomed to boardrooms where his word was law, to five-star hotels where every detail bent to his will. But here, in this maze of white walls and antiseptic smells, he was just another man, stripped of all control. His Armani suit, usually immaculate, was wrinkled from 3 sleepless days. His dark hair, normally styled to perfection, fell across his forehead in disheveled waves. The emerald eyes that had charmed investors and intimidated competitors now held nothing but raw desperation. "Mr. Thorne?" Dr. Williams approached with measured steps, his expression carefully neutral. "We need to discuss your son's feeding situation." Lucian's jaw tightened. His son, the word still felt foreign on his tongue, weighted with both fierce love and devastating loss. 3 days ago, he'd been preparing for fatherhood with his wife Isabella. 3 days ago, he'd believed in happy endings. Now Isabella was gone, and their premature son fought for every breath in the NICU. What kind of discussion? Lucian's voice was hoarse from exhaustion and grief. "Your son is stable, but he needs breast milk to develop properly. Formula isn't giving him the antibodies he needs for his immune system. We need to find a wet nurse, and we need to find one soon." The clinical term felt like a slap. A wet nurse. As if his son were some medieval prince requiring a village woman's services. But if that's what it took. "Cost isn't an issue," Lucian said immediately. "Whatever you need. The best available." Dr. Williams nodded. "I'll contact our social services department. They work with mothers who've recently given birth and might be willing to help. Sometimes women who've lost their own children find comfort in helping other babies." The words hung in the air like a prayer and a curse combined. Lucian stared through the NICU window at the tiny figure connected to machines that beeped and hummed with artificial life. His son's miniature chest rose and fell with mechanical precision, but Lucian could see the fragility in every shallow breath. "How long do we have?" he asked. "Days, not weeks. His current weight is concerning, and his immune system needs the support that only breast milk can provide." Lucian closed his eyes, feeling the weight of another person's life in his hands. In business, he made million-dollar decisions without blinking. But this was his child's survival hanging in the balance, dependent on finding a stranger willing to share the most intimate act of motherhood. "There's something else," Dr. Williams continued gently. "The woman would need to spend significant time here. Newborns feed every 2 to 3 hours. She'd essentially be living at the hospital for the next few weeks. I'll cover all expenses. Hotel, meals, compensation. Whatever she needs. It's not about money, Mr. Thorne. It's about finding someone who's physically and emotionally capable of this commitment. Someone who's recently given birth herself." The doctor's words carried an implication that made Lucian's chest tighten. A woman who'd recently given birth and was available to nurse another's child. The circumstances would almost certainly be tragic. "I understand," Lucian said quietly. "Just find someone, please." Dr. Williams placed a reassuring hand on Lucian's shoulder. "We'll do everything we can. Your son is a fighter. I can see it in his vitals. He just needs a little help right now." As the doctor walked away, Lucian pressed his palm against the NICU window. Inside, his son's tiny hand curled around nothing, grasping for something that wasn't there. The sight tore through Lucian's chest like a physical wound. He'd built an empire from nothing, turned a small family hotel into an international luxury chain worth billions. He'd conquered markets, outmaneuvered competitors, and never met a problem that couldn't be solved with intelligence, determination, and resources. But his money couldn't bring Isabella back. His influence couldn't make his son's lungs stronger. His power couldn't guarantee that somewhere in this city, a woman existed who was willing to share her body's most precious gift with a stranger's child. For the first time in his adult life, Lucian Thorne felt truly helpless. He pulled out his phone and called his assistant. "Marcus, I need you to contact every private agency in the city. Medical consultants, nursing services, anyone who might help us find a wet nurse. Cost is no object. Right away, sir." "How are you holding up?" Lucian stared at his son through the glass, watching the steady rise and fall of that impossibly small chest. I'm not sure I am. 24 hours later, the call came. Dr. Williams found him in the same corridor. Though Lucian had finally changed clothes and attempted to eat something from the hospital cafeteria. We found someone, the doctor said. Her name is Alina Crestfield. She's been through something similar to what you're experiencing. She lost her baby 2 weeks ago and expressed interest in helping when our social worker explained the situation. Lucien felt a complex mix of relief and guilt. Relief that his son might have a chance. Guilt that his child's salvation came from another's tragedy. When can she start? She's here now, actually. Would you like to meet her first? Lucien nodded, his throat tight with emotion he couldn't quite name. In a few minutes he would meet the woman who might save his son's life, a woman who had suffered a loss he could barely imagine, yet was willing to open her heart to help a stranger's child. As they walked toward the family consultation room, Lucien tried to prepare himself for what this encounter might bring, but nothing could have prepared him for what waited behind that door. Will this chance encounter change both their lives forever? The consultation room felt smaller than it actually was, filled with the weight of unspoken grief and fragile hope. Lucien sat rigidly in the uncomfortable plastic chair, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Doctor, Williams checked his watch for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. She should be here any moment, the doctor assured him. I should mention, Mr. Thorne, that Mrs. Crestfield has been through significant trauma. Her baby was stillborn at 38 weeks. She's still processing her loss, but she's determined to help. Lucien's chest constricted. Stillborn. The word carried a finality that made his own situation feel almost hopeful by comparison. At least his son was alive, fighting. This woman had lost everything. Why would she want to do this? He asked quietly. Sometimes helping others heal is the only way we can begin to heal ourselves, Dr. Williams replied. And sometimes the body needs what it was designed to do, even when the heart is broken. The door opened with a soft click and Lucien's breath caught in his throat. The woman who entered was nothing like he'd expected. She was petite, maybe 5'4", with auburn hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, with the kind of delicate features that belonged in Renaissance paintings. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold, deep amber, rimmed with red from recent tears, yet holding a strength that seemed to come from somewhere beyond her small frame. She wore a simple navy cardigan over dark jeans, clothes that hung slightly loose on her frame, suggesting recent weight loss. Her movements were careful, deliberate, like someone navigating through emotional landmines with each step. Mrs. Crestfield, Dr. Williams stood. Thank you for coming. This is Mr. Thorne. Lucien rose, extending his hand. When she took it, her grip was firm despite the tremor he could feel in her fingers. Thank you, he said, his voice rougher than intended. I can't imagine how difficult this must be for you. Alina, she corrected softly. Her voice was melodic, with the faintest hint of an accent he couldn't place. And you don't need to thank me. I need this as much as your son does. There was something about her voice, something familiar, that tickled the edge of his memory. But grief and exhaustion had dulled his ability to focus on anything beyond the immediate crisis. They sat down, Dr. Williams taking the lead. Alina has reviewed your son's medical records. She understands the commitment involved and is prepared to begin immediately if you both agree to move forward. What do you need from me? Lucien asked, looking directly at Alina. She met his gaze steadily. Honesty. About your expectations. About the timeline, about everything. This isn't just a transaction, Mr. Thorne. I'll be intimately involved in your son's life for weeks, maybe months. We need to establish trust. Her directness surprised him. In his business world, everyone danced around truth with corporate speak and diplomatic language. But Alina spoke with the clarity of someone who had already lost what mattered most and had nothing left to protect except her own integrity. I expect nothing except that you help my son survive, Lucien said. The timeline is however long it takes. And as for everything else, he paused, struggling with unfamiliar vulnerability. I'm terrified. I've never felt this helpless in my life. My son is all I have left, and I'm completely dependent on the kindness of someone I've just met. Alina's expression softened slightly. What was your wife like? The question caught him off guard. Isabella? She was warm, always laughing. She could light up any room just by walking into it. She wanted this baby so much, planned every detail of his nursery, read every parenting book she could find. His voice cracked. She would have been an amazing mother. She still is, Alina said quietly. Through you. Through what you're willing to do for your son. Something in her tone, in the way she emphasized certain words, tugged at his memory again. But the moment passed as Dr. Williams cleared his throat. If you're both comfortable proceeding, we can begin with the first feeding this afternoon. Alina, you'll need to stay close to the hospital for the foreseeable future. Mr. Thorne has arranged for accommodations. Actually, Alina interrupted, I'd prefer to stay at the hospital. There's a fold-out chair in the family room that will work fine. I want to be available whenever he needs me. Lucian frowned. That's not necessary. I've reserved a suite at the Grandview. It's only 10 minutes away. I appreciate the offer, but no. Her tone was polite but firm. I need to be here. Please understand, Mr. Thorne, this isn't about convenience or comfort for me. This is about giving your son the best possible care, which means being available every 2 hours, day and night. He studied her face, seeing something he recognized from his own mirror, the desperate need for purpose in the face of overwhelming loss. She wasn't doing this just to help his son. She was doing it to survive her own grief. Alina, he said carefully, when did you lose your baby? 14 days ago, she answered without hesitation. 14 days, 6 hours, and she glanced at her watch. 23 minutes. The precision of her answer hit him like a physical blow. She was counting not just days, but hours and minutes since her world had ended. He thought of his own timeline. 3 days since Isabella's death. 3 days since his son's premature birth. His grief was still raw and immediate. Hers had settled into the kind of detailed accounting that came with prolonged agony. What was your baby's name? He asked. For the first time, her composure cracked slightly. Emma. Emma Rose. She was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes. The most beautiful little face. She just couldn't breathe. The parallel was devastating. Her baby couldn't breathe and died. His baby couldn't breathe but lived. The cruel randomness of it made his chest burn with anger and guilt in equal measure. I'm sorry, he said, meaning it with every fiber of his being. Alina nodded, wiping away a tear that had escaped despite her efforts. Your son is going to live, Mr. Thorne. I can feel it. Some babies are fighters from the very beginning. Emma wasn't strong enough for this world, but your son, he has something to fight for. What does he have to fight for? Lucian asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. You, she said simply. A father who's willing to humble himself to ask for help. A father who's sitting in this room instead of hiding in his office. A father who looks at his son through that window like he's the most precious thing on earth. Her words carved something open in his chest. He hadn't thought of himself as a good father. He'd been focused entirely on his failures, his inability to save Isabella, his powerlessness to heal his son's premature lungs, his complete ignorance about babies and parenting. Are you ready to meet him? Alina asked, standing. Your son? The way she said your son carried a reverence that made Lucian's throat tight. She wasn't just offering to feed his child. She was offering to love him, at least for as long as he needed her. As they walked toward the NICU, Lucian felt the first stirring of something that might eventually become hope. This woman, this stranger who had suffered an unimaginable loss, was willing to pour her grief into healing. She was willing to give his son what her own child had never needed. But as they approached the NICU doors, Lucien couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Alina Cressfield than tragic circumstance and generous spirit. Something about her felt like a half-remembered dream, a melody he'd heard long ago, but couldn't quite recall. He was about to discover just how right he was. The NICU hummed with quiet efficiency, a symphony of monitors and ventilators that had become the soundtrack to Lucian's new reality. Nurses moved with practiced grace between the rows of incubators, each containing someone's miracle or heartbreak. Lucian led Alina to the far corner where his son's incubator sat beneath a warming lamp. The baby looked impossibly small against the white blankets, his chest rising and falling with the assistance of a nasal cannula that delivered supplemental oxygen. Tiny sensors dotted his translucent skin, connected to machines that tracked every vital sign. He's beautiful, Alina whispered, her voice filled with genuine wonder. She pressed her palms against the incubator's plastic walls, studying the miniature features with the intensity of someone memorizing every detail. Look at those eyelashes. And his little fingers, they're so perfect. Lucian found himself seeing his son through her eyes for the first time, not as a collection of medical concerns and statistical probabilities, but as a tiny person with his own distinct characteristics. The baby's hair was dark like his own, but fine and wispy. His nose was small and slightly upturned, reminiscent of Isabella's profile in their wedding photos. He doesn't have a name yet, Lucian admitted. Isabella and I had a list, but I couldn't decide. It felt wrong to choose without her. Alina nodded thoughtfully. Names have power. He'll tell you what his name is when he's ready. Nurse Patricia approached with a gentle smile. She was a veteran NICU nurse in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and hands that had guided countless families through their darkest and brightest moments. Are we ready for his feeding? He's been fussing a bit. I think he knows something good is coming. Alina's entire demeanor shifted. The grief that had shadowed her features since she'd entered the hospital was replaced by something Lucien could only describe as purpose. She washed her hands with meticulous care, dried them with the sanitizer, and settled into the rocking chair beside the incubator. Can you hold him? She asked Nurse Patricia. I'd like to see how he responds before we try the feeding. Patricia carefully lifted the baby from his incubator, managing the tangle of tubes and wires with practiced expertise. The moment the infant was cradled in her arms, he began to root instinctively, his tiny mouth opening and closing as he searched for nourishment. He knows, Alina said softly. His body remembers what it needs. She took the baby with movements so natural, so instinctive, that Lucien felt his chest tighten with emotion. This was what Isabella should have been doing. This should have been their moment of joy, not this complicated arrangement born from mutual tragedy. But as Alina adjusted the baby's position and began to nurse him, something extraordinary happened. The tension that had been present in her face since she'd entered the hospital began to ease. Her shoulders relaxed, her breathing deepened, and then, as the baby latched successfully and began to feed with eager determination, Alina smiled. It wasn't a polite smile or a professional gesture of reassurance. It was pure, unguarded joy, the kind of smile that transformed someone's entire face and made you forget, for just a moment, that the world could be a place of suffering. The smile started at the corners of her mouth, spreading upward until it reached her amber eyes, making them sparkle with warmth and light. Her head tilted slightly as she gazed down at the baby, and she murmured something too soft for Lucien to hear. And in that moment, 28 years collapsed into nothing. The hospital room faded away. The beeping monitors became distant. The smell of antiseptic was replaced by the scent of summer grass and childhood adventures. He was 11 years old again, sitting by the old oak tree in Riverside Park, watching a little girl with auburn pigtails and amber eyes as she carefully bandaged an injured sparrow's wing. She'd looked up at him with that same radiant smile when the bird had finally taken flight, her whole face glowing with quiet triumph. "Allie," he whispered, so quietly he wasn't sure he'd spoken aloud, but she heard him. Her head snapped up, the smile faltering as she met his gaze. For a moment, neither of them moved. The baby continued to nurse contentedly, oblivious to the earthquake happening in the adult world above him. "Luke," her voice was barely a breath, filled with disbelief and recognition and 28 years of wondering. "Alina Westbrook," he said, using her maiden name like a key that unlocked a door he'd thought was permanently sealed. "I can't believe, how is this possible?" Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was careful not to disturb the baby. "You recognize me? After all this time?" "Your smile," he said, moving closer to the chair. "It's exactly the same. God, Allie, I've thought about that smile for 28 years. She laughed through her tears, a sound that was equal parts joy and heartbreak. "I thought I'd never see you again. After your family moved to New York, I looked for you everywhere. Social media, professional networks everywhere. But Thorn Holdings, I never connected it to the Luke Monroe I knew as a child. My stepfather adopted me when I was 16, he explained, his voice thick with emotion. Changed my last name. I looked for you too, but Alina Westbrook seemed to have disappeared from the world. Married name, she said simply. Crestfield was my husband's name. I kept it after the divorce because I was tired of changing who I was for other people. The weight of lost years settled between them. Lucien remembered the last day he'd seen her. They were both 13, standing on her front porch while his parents loaded a moving truck. He'd promised to write every day, to find a way to visit, to never forget her. They'd made plans to find each other when they were old enough to make their own choices. But 13-year-old promises were fragile things, easily broken by distance and time and the crushing reality of adult interference. His mother had refused to forward his letters, insisting he needed to focus on his new life in New York. By the time he was old enough to search independently, the trail had gone cold. I never stopped loving you, he said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. I know that sounds crazy after all these years, but it's true. You were my first everything, First friend, first love, first heartbreak when I couldn't find you. Alina's tears came harder now, but her voice remained steady. I named my daughter after you, she whispered. Emma Rose. Emma because it means whole or complete, and Rose because, do you remember the rose garden behind my house, where we used to hide and tell each other secrets? Lucian's knees nearly buckled. She'd named her baby, the baby she'd lost, after their childhood memories. The tragedy of it was almost unbearable. Allie, he said, reaching out to touch her hand. I'm so sorry about Emma. I'm so incredibly sorry. She would have loved this, Alina said, looking down at the baby in her arms. Helping another baby grow strong. She would have wanted this. The baby finished feeding and Alina carefully adjusted him, supporting his head as she moved him to her shoulder for burping. The movement was so natural, so maternal, that Lucien could see exactly what kind of mother she would have been. What happens now? He asked quietly. I mean, with us, with this situation. Alina met his eyes over the baby's head. I don't know, she admitted. This is all so overwhelming, finding you again under these circumstances. I need time to process everything. Of course, I can't believe you're here, that after all these years when I needed help the most, the universe brought me you. Maybe Emma guided me here, Alina said softly. Maybe she knew your son needed someone who understood what it meant to love a child completely, even if you can't keep them forever. As if on cue, the baby let out a small burp and settled more comfortably against Alina's shoulder. His color already looked better, his breathing more relaxed. The first feeding had been a complete success. But for Lucien, the true miracle wasn't just that his son was getting the nourishment he needed. It was that the woman providing it was the same person he'd been searching for, consciously or unconsciously, for most of his adult life. As Alina prepared to put the baby back in his incubator, Lucien realized that nothing would ever be the same. His son's survival was no longer the only thing hanging in the balance. The return of his childhood love under these impossible circumstances had changed everything. The question now was whether they could find a way forward that honored both their shared past and their complicated present. 3 weeks had passed since that life-changing moment of recognition, and the NICU had become their shared world. The baby, whom they'd finally named Oliver after Lucian's grandfather, was thriving under Alina's dedicated care. His weight had increased steadily, his breathing had strengthened, and the doctors spoke optimistically about his discharge in another few weeks. But the growing health of Oliver seemed inversely related to the emotional distance that had developed between Lucian and Alina. They maintained a careful politeness, a professional courtesy that felt almost cruel given their history. They discussed feeding schedules and medical updates. They coordinated their time at the hospital with the precision of business associates. They were unfailingly considerate of each other's needs and space. What they didn't do was acknowledge the 11-year-old boy and 7-year-old girl who had sworn eternal friendship under a summer sky, who had been separated when they were 13. Alina had thrown herself into caring for Oliver with the devotion of a mother, arriving every morning at 7 and staying until late evening. She'd established routines, learned his preferences, could soothe his cries with a gentleness that made Lucien's chest ache with gratitude, and something deeper he refused to name. You don't have to stay so late, he told her one evening as she prepared for Oliver's 9 o'clock feeding. The NICU was quieter at night, dimly lit and peaceful. Most of the other families had gone home to dinner and normal lives. I want to, she replied, settling into the rocking chair that had become hers by unspoken agreement. His nighttime feedings are important for establishing his circadian rhythms. She spoke with the authority of someone who'd researched every aspect of infant care, though Lucien suspected her knowledge came from preparing for Emma, rather than caring for Oliver. Every piece of information she shared felt like a gift from the daughter she'd lost to the son who was thriving. Alina, he said carefully, using her full name as he'd been doing since their reunion. We need to talk about practical matters. When Oliver comes home in a few weeks, what's your plan? She focused on adjusting Oliver's position, not meeting his eyes. I'll continue nursing him for as long as he needs it. The doctor recommended at least 6 months for optimal immunity development. That's not what I meant, and you know it. Then what did you mean? Her tone was neutral, professional, but Lucien caught the slight tightness around her eyes that had always appeared when she was trying not to cry. Even as children, Allie had been determined not to let others see her tears. I meant, where will you live? What will you do for work? How do we navigate this situation given our history? Alina finally looked at him, her amber eyes steady, but guarded. "Our history is exactly why we need to keep this simple, Luke. You're grieving your wife. I'm grieving my daughter. Oliver needs care and I can provide it. Everything else is just complication we can't afford right now." The way she said his childhood nickname felt like a door closing. She wasn't rejecting their past exactly, but she was making it clear that their past couldn't be their present. "You're right," he said, though the words felt like swallowing glass. "But that doesn't answer the practical questions. I've been thinking about the penthouse apartment. The top floor has been vacant since I've been using it for storage. We could set it up as a separate living space for you. Complete privacy, your own entrance, but close enough that you could care for Oliver around the clock." Alina was quiet for so long that Lucian wondered if she was going to respond at all. Oliver had fallen asleep in her arms, his tiny face peaceful and content. "That's very generous," she said finally. "But I think it would be better if I found my own place nearby. Maybe something within walking distance." "Alina, be practical. You haven't worked since—" He stopped himself before saying, "since Emma died." But they both knew what he meant. "Let me help. It's the least I can do considering what you're doing for Oliver." "What I'm doing for Oliver, I'm also doing for myself," she said quietly. "You need to understand that. This isn't charity or self-sacrifice. Caring for him is helping me heal." There it was. The truth they'd been dancing around for 3 weeks. She wasn't just helping his son. She was using his son to survive her own grief. The arrangement was as much about her need to mother a child as it was about Oliver's need for nourishment. "I understand," he said, "but that doesn't change the fact that you're giving up your life to save his. The apartment offer stands. No strings attached, just practical convenience." Alina shifted Oliver to her shoulder, rubbing his back with practiced circles. "Can I think about it?" Of course. They fell into the familiar silence that had characterized most of their interactions lately. Comfortable in some ways, painful in others. They were both trying so hard not to complicate an already impossible situation that they'd created a strange limbo of suppressed emotion and careful distance. "Do you remember," Alina said suddenly, "the summer we tried to build that treehouse in the oak tree behind my house?" The question caught him off guard. It was the first time either of them had voluntarily mentioned their childhood. "You mean the summer we fell out of the tree 6 times and gave up?" "We didn't give up. We just decided it was safer to build our fort on the ground." A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "You were so determined to prove you could hammer a nail straight. You must have bent 20 nails trying. And you kept insisting we needed to follow the blueprint you'd drawn, even though it was architecturally impossible." It was not impossible. It was ahead of its time. For a moment, the careful distance between them dissolved. They were just 2 people sharing a memory, letting themselves remember when the world had been simpler and their biggest concern was whether they had enough lumber scraps to finish their fort. But the moment passed when Oliver stirred in Alina's arms, reminding them both of the present reality. "We were good friends," Alina said softly. "Before everything else, we were really good friends." "The best," Lucian agreed. "I never had another friend like you." "Maybe that's what we need to focus on," she said, meeting his eyes. "Maybe instead of trying to navigate around our history, we should remember what worked about it. We were friends first." "Just friends?" he asked, though he wasn't entirely sure what answer he was hoping for. "For now," she said, and something in her tone suggested she was making a conscious choice rather than stating a preference. "Oliver needs stability and consistency. We need to heal from our losses. Everything else can wait." Lucian nodded, understanding the wisdom in her words even as part of him wanted to argue. She was right. They were both too broken, too raw, too vulnerable to add the complication of romantic feelings to an already complex situation. "Friends then," he said. "Like we used to be." "Like we used to be," she agreed. But as Oliver began to fuss for his next feeding, Lucian couldn't help but notice how natural Alina looked with a baby in her arms, how perfectly she fit into the life he was trying to build from the ashes of his old one. Friends might be what they needed to be, but it wasn't what his heart wanted them to be. The question was whether friendship would be enough to sustain them through the months ahead, or whether the pull between them was too strong to ignore indefinitely. 2 months later, the penthouse felt like an entirely different world from the sterile hospital environment that had defined their lives. Lucian stood in the nursery he'd hastily assembled, watching Alina arrange Oliver's belongings with the meticulous care of someone creating a sacred space. She'd finally accepted his offer of the apartment upstairs, though she'd insisted on paying rent, a symbolic amount that he'd agreed to rather than argue. The compromise had become typical of their relationship, Practical solutions wrapped around carefully maintained boundaries. The monitor is connected to your phone and mine, Alina explained, adjusting the baby camera for the third time. And I've programmed the feeding schedule into both our calendars. He's still waking every 3 hours, but Dr. Williams thinks he might start sleeping longer stretches soon. Oliver, now weighing nearly 7 pounds and breathing entirely on his own, slept peacefully in his crib. His tiny fists were curled beside his face, and his dark hair had begun to show hints of curl that reminded Lucien painfully of Isabella. "You've thought of everything," Lucien said, meaning it. In the past month, Alina had transformed from a broken woman seeking purpose into someone who approached childcare with professional-level competence. She'd read every parenting book, consulted with specialists, and created systems that would have impressed his most detail-oriented employees. "I have to," she replied, not looking at him. "This is temporary, Luke. Someday you'll want to hire a proper nanny, someone who can be with Oliver long-term. I need to make sure he's established in healthy routines before that transition." The word temporary hit him like a physical blow. Over the past 2 months, he'd begun to imagine a different future, one where Alina wasn't just Oliver's nurse but a permanent part of their lives. But she'd been consistent in framing her role as transitional, healing for both herself and Oliver, until they were both strong enough to move forward separately. "What if I don't want a nanny?" he asked carefully. "What if I want you to stay?" Alina finally turned to face him, her amber eyes reflecting a sadness that had become familiar. "Luke, we've talked about this. I can't build my whole life around caring for your son. That wouldn't be healthy for any of us, especially Oliver. He needs to bond with you as his primary caregiver. He can bond with me while also having you in his life." "As what?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to address. Before Lucien could answer, Oliver began to fuss, not quite crying but making the soft sounds that indicated he was waking up and would soon be hungry. Alina moved to the crib with the fluid grace of someone who'd made this journey hundreds of times. "Hey, little love," she murmured, lifting Oliver and automatically checking his diaper. "Someone's ready for dinner, isn't he?" Lucien watched her settle into the rocking chair they'd moved from the hospital, watched Oliver immediately calm at the sound of her voice and the familiar comfort of her arms. This scene had become the rhythm of their days, Oliver's needs creating a schedule around which everything else revolved, and Alina meeting those needs with a devotion that was beautiful and heartbreaking in equal measure. "Can I ask you something?" Lucien said as Oliver began to nurse contentedly. "Of course. Do you think about Emma when you're feeding him?" It was a question he'd been afraid to ask, but their friendship had deepened enough over the past months that he felt he could risk it. They'd learned to navigate each other's grief with careful honesty, sharing memories when they felt strong enough and respecting silence when they didn't. Alina was quiet for a long moment, her hand gently stroking Oliver's dark hair. "Every time," she said finally, "but not in the way you might think. I don't imagine she's Oliver, or pretend he's mine. I think about what she would have wanted for me, whether she'd be proud of how I'm choosing to heal. And what do you think she'd want? For me to be happy again someday. For me to remember that love doesn't end just because life does." She looked up at him with eyes that held more peace than he'd seen in months. "Caring for Oliver has taught me that I'm still capable of loving someone else's child completely. That maybe my capacity for motherhood didn't die with Emma." The words stirred something in Lucien's chest that he wasn't ready to name. Over the past months, he'd watched Alina pour her maternal instincts into Oliver's care, but he'd also watched her begin to reclaim pieces of herself that had been buried in grief. She laughed more easily now. She hummed while she worked. She'd started reading novels again instead of just parenting manuals. "What about you?" she asked. "Do you think about Isabella when you hold him?" "Less than I used to," he admitted. "And that makes me feel guilty sometimes, like I'm forgetting her." "You're not forgetting her. You're learning to live with the love instead of just the loss. There's a difference." These conversations had become precious to him, moments when they moved beyond practical concerns into deeper emotional territory. They were becoming friends again, but friends who'd both been fundamentally changed by grief and parenthood. "I have something to tell you," Alina said as Oliver finished feeding. "I got a call from my old employer yesterday. There's an opening for a pediatric nurse practitioner at Children's Hospital. They want me to interview." Lucien's stomach dropped. That's wonderful. It's what you trained for. It would mean going back to work eventually, probably when Oliver is around 6 months old and fully weaned. 6 months. 4 months from now. The timeline felt both impossibly long and terrifyingly short. Are you interested? I think I am, she said slowly. For the first time since Emma died, I can imagine having a life beyond just surviving each day. That feels important. Lucien nodded, trying to keep his expression neutral even as everything in him wanted to argue. He wanted to tell her that she already had a life here, with them, that Oliver needed her, that he needed her. But those weren't the words of a friend, and friendship was all they'd agreed to offer each other. You should interview, he said. Even if you're not sure yet, it's good to explore your options. Thank you for understanding. But as Oliver settled into sleep and Alina prepared to return to her apartment upstairs, Lucien realized he didn't understand at all. He didn't understand how she could contemplate leaving when they'd built something so precious together. He didn't understand how she could look at Oliver, and at him, and see a temporary arrangement rather than the beginning of something permanent. Most of all, he didn't understand how much longer he could pretend that friendship was enough, when what he really wanted was to ask her to stay forever. As Alina kissed Oliver's forehead and whispered her usual good night, "Sweet dreams, little love. Mama Alina will see you in a few hours." Lucien felt something shift inside his chest. She called herself Mama Alina. Not just Alina, not just his nurse, but Mama Alina. Maybe he wasn't the only one struggling with the boundaries they'd so carefully constructed. 6 weeks later, Lucien found himself pacing the marble floors of his penthouse like a caged animal. Alina had left 3 hours ago for her interview at Children's Hospital, taking with her a confidence he hadn't seen since before Emma's death. She'd worn a navy blazer that brought out the amber in her eyes, her hair pulled back in a professional chignon that made her look every inch the accomplished pediatric nurse she'd once been. Oliver, now 4.5 months old and thriving, had been fussy all morning without Alina's familiar presence. Even though Lucien had become competent at basic childcare over the past months, Oliver clearly preferred Alina's touch, her voice, her intuitive understanding of his needs. "She'll be back soon, buddy," Lucien murmured, bouncing Oliver gently as he continued his circuits around the living room. "Mama Alina always comes back." The words slipped out without conscious thought, but they stopped him cold. When had he started thinking of her as Mama Alina too? When had her temporary role in their lives started feeling like the most natural thing in the world? His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, his assistant, reminding him about the board meeting he was supposed to attend that afternoon. Lucien stared at the message, realizing he'd completely forgotten about it. 6 months ago, missing a board meeting would have been unthinkable. His company, his empire, had been the center of his universe. Now all he could think about was whether Alina was impressing the interview panel, whether she was remembering to mention her specialized training in neonatal care, whether she was already mentally preparing to leave them. The front door opened with a soft click that had become the most welcome sound in his day. Oliver immediately perked up, his fussy crying turning to excited babbling. "Someone missed me," Alina called out, her voice carrying a lightness that made Lucien's chest tight with complicated emotions. She appeared in the living room still wearing the blazer, but her hair had come loose from its pins, and her cheeks were flushed with what looked like excitement. Oliver practically launched himself toward her, his small arms reaching out with the desperate enthusiasm of a baby who'd been separated from his primary caregiver. "How did it go?" Lucien asked, trying to keep his tone casual as he handed Oliver over. "Hello to you too, little love," Alina cooed to Oliver, who immediately settled against her shoulder with a contented sigh that spoke volumes about their bond. "Did you give Daddy a hard time while I was gone?" "He was fine," Lucien lied. "Just a little fussy." "How was the interview?" Alina settled into the rocking chair that had somehow migrated from Oliver's nursery to the main living room over the past weeks. "It was incredible, actually. They offered me the position." The words hit Lucien like a physical blow, even though he'd been expecting them. "That's wonderful," he managed. "Congratulations. The salary is better than I hoped, and the benefits are excellent. They're willing to let me start part-time initially, building up to full-time over 6 months. And Luke," she paused, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "They're creating a new program for families dealing with infant loss. They want me to help develop it, to use my experience with Emma to help other parents." It was everything she should want. A chance to return to her profession, to make a difference, to build a life beyond the careful boundaries they'd constructed around grief and healing. Lucien could see how much the opportunity meant to her, could see pieces of the woman she'd been before loss had reshaped her, and he hated every second of her excitement. "When would you start?" he asked. "They're flexible about timing. They understand my current situation with Oliver. They suggested maybe starting when he's 6 months old." fully weaned and sleeping through the night. 6 weeks. They had 6 weeks left before everything changed. And they're okay with the transitional period? Understanding that you're not just leaving a job, but leaving a child I love? She finished his unspoken question with the directness that had always characterized their friendship. I explained the situation. They were very understanding. In fact, they thought my experience with Oliver would make me better at the job, that I'd understand the parent perspective in a way most medical professionals don't. Oliver had fallen asleep in her arms, his tiny face peaceful and trusting. The sight of them together, Alina gazing down at him with such tenderness, Oliver completely relaxed in her care, made Lucian's throat burn with unshed emotion. "You're going to take it," he said. It wasn't a question. "I think I am." She looked up at him, her expression uncertain for the first time since she'd returned. "You think I should, right? You think it's the right choice?" The question felt like a test he was destined to fail. As her friend, he should encourage her to reclaim her professional life, to build independence, to heal fully from her losses. As Oliver's father, he wanted her to stay forever. As the man who'd been falling back in love with his childhood sweetheart for the past 4 months, he wanted to beg her not to leave them. "I think," he said carefully, "that you should do whatever makes you happiest." "That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give you." Alina studied his face with the perceptiveness that had always made it impossible to hide anything from her. "What aren't you saying, Luke?" "Everything." He wasn't saying that watching her mother his son had become the highlight of his days. He wasn't saying that somewhere in the past months, she'd stopped being his childhood friend and become the woman he couldn't imagine living without. He wasn't saying that the thought of losing her again felt like losing Isabella all over again, except this time it would be by choice rather than tragedy. "I'm saying that you've given us 4 months of your life," he said instead. "You've helped Oliver become the healthy, happy baby he is today. You've given me time to learn how to be a father. You don't owe us anything more than that. And if I wanted to give you more..." The question was so quiet he almost missed it. "What do you mean?" Alina shifted Oliver to her shoulder, using the movement to avoid meeting Lucian's eyes. "What if the job isn't what I want anymore? What if what I want is to stay here with you and Oliver?" The words hung between them, loaded with possibilities that neither had dared voice until this moment. "As what?" Lucian asked, echoing her question from months earlier. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I know that the thought of leaving Oliver, leaving both of you, makes me feel sick. And I know that when they offered me the job, my first thought wasn't excitement. It was panic." Lucian moved closer to the rocking chair, close enough to see the vulnerability in her amber eyes. "Alina, I love him, Luke. I love Oliver like he's my own son. And she took a shaky breath. "I think I'm falling in love with you all over again." The admission shattered every carefully constructed boundary they'd built around their relationship. Months of just friends, and temporary arrangements, and healing first, crumbled in the space of a single honest moment. "I've been in love with you since the day I recognized you in that hospital room," Lucian said, the words pouring out like water through a broken dam. "I've been pretending friendship was enough, but it's not. It's never going to be enough." They stared at each other across the small space between them, Oliver sleeping peacefully in Alina's arms, unaware that his world was about to change in the most fundamental way possible. The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of suppressed longing and the weight of words that couldn't be taken back. Oliver stirred slightly in Alina's arms, making the soft sounds of a baby transitioning between sleep cycles, but neither adult moved to disturb the fragile moment. "Luke," Alina whispered, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "What are we doing?" "I don't know," he admitted, moving closer until he could reach out and touch her cheek. Her skin was warm beneath his fingers, real and present, in a way that made everything else fade into background noise. "All I know is that I can't pretend anymore. I can't watch you hold my son and not want you to be his mother. I can't listen to you talk about leaving and not want to fight for you to stay. We said we'd be friends," she reminded him, though her voice lacked conviction. "We said we needed to heal first, that Oliver needed stability. Oliver has stability. Look at him." Lucian gestured to the sleeping baby, completely relaxed and content in her arms. "He's never known a world where you weren't his primary caregiver. In his mind, you are his mother." The words hung between them, truth and longing wrapped together in a way that made Alina's eyes fill with tears. "Don't say that unless you mean it," she said. "Don't say that if you're going to change your mind when the novelty wears off or when you meet someone who doesn't come with all this baggage." "Baggage?" Lucian's voice sharpened with something between anger and disbelief. Is that what you think this is? That your grief, your loss, your incredible strength is baggage? Isn't it? Alina's voice broke slightly. I'm a woman who lost her baby, who's been living in your spare apartment, caring for your son because I need it as much as he does. I don't have a job, I don't have my own place, I don't have anything to offer you except the ability to love your child. You don't have anything to offer me? Lucian repeated, incredulous. Alina, you saved my son's life. You taught me how to be a father. You brought laughter back into a house that had known nothing but grief. You're offering me everything I never knew I wanted and everything I never thought I could have again. Oliver made a small sound of distress, responding to the emotional tension in the room even in his sleep. Alina automatically adjusted her hold on him, rocking slightly to soothe him back into deeper sleep. The movement was so instinctive, so maternal, that Lucian felt his chest tighten with overwhelming love for both of them. I turned down the job, Alina said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. What? I called them back while you were in the shower earlier. I told them I couldn't accept the position. Lucian stared at her, processing the implications of her words. Because of what you just told me? Because you want to stay? Because I couldn't imagine walking away from this life we've built together? Because when I think about my future, I can't picture it without you and Oliver in it. She looked up at him, her amber eyes bright with unshed tears. Because I realized that what we have here isn't temporary or transitional. It's home. The word hit Lucian like a revelation. Home. Not the penthouse with its expensive furniture and panoramic views, but this. Alina in the rocking chair with Oliver in her arms, late-night feedings, and shared laughter and the quiet contentment of a family created from loss and healing. I love you, he said, the words coming out rougher than he intended. I love you, and I love watching you love my son, and I want us to be a family, a real family. Even though we're both broken, she asked, especially because we're both broken. We know what it means to lose everything. We know how precious this is. Alina carefully stood, still holding Oliver, and moved to place him in the portable bassinet they kept in the living room for moments like this. The baby settled without waking, one tiny fist curled near his face, completely secure in his small world. When she turned back to face Lucian, there were tears streaming down her cheeks, but her expression held a hope he hadn't seen since before Emma's death. I'm scared, she admitted. I'm scared that if we try this and it doesn't work, I'll lose both of you, I'll lose Oliver. And I'm scared that if we don't try, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what we could have been. Lucian reached for her hands, threading their fingers together. But I'm more scared of letting you walk away again. We can't go back to being children, Luke. We can't pretend the last 28 years didn't happen, or that we don't both carry scars from losing the people we loved most. I don't want to go back, he said firmly. I want to go forward. With you, with Oliver, with whatever family we can build together. Alina searched his face, looking for something. Doubt, hesitation, the kind of uncertainty that might mean he'd change his mind when the emotional intensity of the moment faded. But all she saw was the same steady determination that had characterized the boy she'd fallen in love with at 7 years old, now tempered by the wisdom and strength of a man who'd survived unimaginable loss. Okay, she whispered. Okay, yes, let's try. The space between them disappeared as Lucian pulled her into his arms, holding her close enough to feel her heartbeat against his chest. She fit against him perfectly, as if the years and pain and separation had been nothing more than a long detour, bringing them back to where they'd always belonged. I love you too, she murmured against his shoulder. I love you, and I love Oliver, and I want to spend every day for the rest of my life showing you both how much. When Lucian pulled back to look at her face, he saw the woman she'd been at 7, brave and fierce and full of love, merged seamlessly with the woman she'd become through loss and healing. He saw his future in her amber eyes, saw the family they could create together, saw the possibility of happiness he'd thought was lost forever. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, weighted with 28 years of separation and 4 months of careful friendship. But as Alina's arms wound around his neck and he deepened the kiss, it became something more urgent, a claiming, a promise, a declaration that they were done pretending to be anything less than what they'd always been to each other. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Oliver chose that moment to wake with a soft cry that quickly escalated into full-fledged hunger demands. Someone has perfect timing, Alina laughed, wiping away tears she didn't remember shedding. Just like his parents, Lucian said. and then stopped, realizing what he'd said. I mean, parents, Alina repeated softly, testing the word. I like the sound of that. As she lifted Oliver and settled into the rocking chair for his evening feeding, Lucian watched his son latch immediately, watched Alina's face soften into the expression of complete contentment that had become so familiar. This was his family, imperfect, born from tragedy, built on second chances and stubborn love. But as Alina began to hum softly to Oliver, the same lullaby she'd sung to him every night for months, Lucian felt a shadow of unease creep into his perfect moment. They'd crossed a line tonight that they couldn't uncross. They'd committed to trying to build something real together. The question now was whether the world would let them keep what they'd found, or whether the past had one more cruel twist waiting to destroy their fragile happiness. 3 weeks had passed since that life-changing evening, and Lucian had never been happier. Their transition from friends to lovers had been surprisingly natural, as if they were simply remembering how to be the people they'd always been meant to become. Alina had moved her belongings from the upstairs apartment into his master suite, and Oliver's nursery had been relocated closer to their bedroom. They moved through their days with the easy rhythm of a family that had been together for years rather than months. Morning feedings while coffee brewed, shared laughter over Oliver's increasingly animated expressions, quiet evenings planning their future together. Lucian had even started working from home more often, delegating responsibilities he'd never trusted to anyone else. For the first time in his adult life, his business empire felt less important than the small, perfect world he'd built within his penthouse walls. I have something for you, he said one evening after Oliver had settled into his longest stretch of sleep. They were curled together on the couch, Alina's head on his shoulder, both of them savoring the peaceful quiet that had become precious. More something? She teased, gesturing to the fresh flowers he'd had delivered that morning, the professional massage therapist he'd booked for her that afternoon, the endless small gestures that had characterized his courtship over the past weeks. This is different, he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. His fingers closed around the small velvet box he'd been carrying for 3 days, waiting for the right moment. Alina sat up, her eyes widening as she recognized the shape and implications of what he was holding. Luke, before you say anything, he said quickly, I know this might seem fast to other people. I know we've only been together romantically for 3 weeks. But the truth is, I've been in love with you for 28 years. The only thing that's fast about this is how long it took me to find you again. He opened the box, revealing a vintage Art Deco engagement ring with a central emerald surrounded by diamonds. The stone caught the lamplight, throwing green fire across the white gold setting. It was my grandmother's, he explained. She always said it should go to the woman who brought magic back into our family's life. I can't think of anyone who fits that description better than you. Alina stared at the ring, her amber eyes filling with tears. It's beautiful, she whispered. But Luke, are you sure? Are you absolutely sure this is what you want? I want to marry you, he said simply. I want to adopt Oliver legally so he's yours in every way that matters. I want to give you more children if you want them, or be content with just Oliver if you don't. I want to spend every day for the rest of my life proving that second chances can be better than first ones. Yes, she said, the word coming out in a rush. Yes, I want all of that. I want to marry you and be Oliver's mother and build the life we dreamed about when we were children. Lucian slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling slightly with emotion. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting 28 years for Alina's hand. They kissed with the desperate happiness of people who'd found their way back to each other against impossible odds. When they broke apart, both laughing and crying simultaneously, Oliver chose that moment to wake with a soft cry that quickly escalated. I'll get him, Alina said, practically bouncing with excitement. I can't wait to tell him he's getting married parents. As she hurried toward the nursery, Lucien stared at his phone, realizing he should call someone, share this news with someone who mattered. But the list of people who truly understood what this meant was surprisingly short. His parents were dead. Isabella's family had cut contact after her death, and his business associates were just that. Associates, not friends. His phone rang before he could decide who to call first. The number was unfamiliar, but something about it nagged at his memory. Lucian Thorne, he answered. Luke? Oh my God, I can't believe I finally found you. The voice hit him like a physical blow. Female, familiar, carrying an excitement that made his stomach clench with sudden dread. Who is this? He asked, though part of him already knew. It's Sophia. Sophia Chen. Well, it's Sophia Morrison now, but you knew me as Sophia Chen. From Madison Prep? We dated senior year? Lucian's blood turned cold. Sophia Chen, the girl he'd dated for 8 months during his final year of high school, the relationship that had ended when she'd moved to California for college, the girl who'd called him 3 weeks into their freshman year to tell him she was pregnant, then called back 2 weeks later to say she'd miscarried. Except now, 21 years later, she was calling him with an excitement that suggested something very different had happened. "Sophia," he said carefully, "it's been a long time. How did you get this number?" "I've been looking for you for months," she said, her words tumbling over each other. "Ever since Daniel turned 21 and started asking questions about his father. Luke, we need to talk. In person. There's something I should have told you years ago." Daniel. The name hit him like a sledgehammer to the chest. "What are you talking about?" "I didn't miscarry, Luke. I was 18 and scared, and my parents threatened to disown me if I didn't handle the situation. They sent me to live with my aunt in Portland until after the baby was born. I gave him up for adoption to a wonderful family, but..." Her voice broke slightly. "But he's been looking for his biological parents, and he found me 6 months ago. He wants to meet you." The world tilted sideways. Lucien gripped the phone so hard his knuckles turned white, his mind racing through the implications of what she was telling him. "You're saying I have a son," he said slowly. "A 21-year-old son that you've kept secret for 21 years. I know how this sounds, I know you must be angry, but I was so young and my parents..." "Where are you?" he interrupted. "We're here, in New York. Daniel and I flew in this morning. We're staying at the Marriott near Central Park. Luke, he looks just like you. Same eyes, same stubborn chin. There's no doubt he's yours." From the nursery, Lucian could hear Alina's soft voice as she soothed Oliver back to sleep, could hear her humming the lullaby that had become the soundtrack to their evenings. She was wearing his ring, planning their future, completely unaware that their perfect world was about to be shattered by a secret that predated everything they'd built together. "I need time to process this," he said. "Of course. But Luke? Daniel's a good kid. He's smart and funny, and he just wants to know where he comes from. He's not looking for money or anything like that. He just wants to meet his father." After Lucian hung up, he sat in stunned silence, staring at the phone as if it might provide answers to questions he didn't even know how to ask. How do you tell the woman you just proposed to that you have a secret child? How do you explain that while you were building a life with her and Oliver, there was another son, a son who was legally an adult, waiting to meet him? "He went right back to sleep," Alina said, returning from the nursery with a glow of contentment that made Lucien's chest ache. "I think he approves of our engagement." He was smiling in his sleep. She curled back up beside him, holding out her hand to admire the ring in the lamplight. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and this will all be a dream," she said happily, "that I'll be back in that hospital room, still broken, still alone." "Alina," Lucien started, then stopped. How could he destroy her happiness with news that would change everything? How could he tell her that the family they just committed to building was about to become infinitely more complicated? "What's wrong?" she asked, picking up on his tension with the intuition that had always connected them. "You look like you've seen a ghost." In a way, he had. The ghost of choices made 21 years ago, consequences he'd never known existed, a past that refused to stay buried. "We need to talk," he said quietly. The happiness faded from Alina's face, replaced by the kind of wariness that came from experience with life-changing phone calls and unexpected revelations. "About what?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew that whatever he was about to tell her would change everything. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Alina sat frozen on the couch, her left hand still extended where she'd been admiring the engagement ring that now felt heavy as lead on her finger. Lucien's expression had transformed from joy to anguish in the space of a single phone call, and she could feel her world beginning to tilt off its axis. "Just tell me," she said quietly. "Whatever it is, just say it." Lucien ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she'd learned meant he was struggling to find words for something impossible. "I just got a call from someone I knew in high school. Sophia Chen. We dated for a few months senior year." "Okay," Alina said carefully, though something in his tone made her stomach clench with dread. "When we both left for college, she called me about 3 weeks in, said she was pregnant." Lucien's voice was hollow, distant, as if he were recounting someone else's story. "Then 2 weeks later, she called back and said she'd miscarried. I was 18, Alina. I was devastated, but also relieved. We were kids. I had no idea how to be a father." Alina felt the blood draining from her face, She didn't miscarry, did she? No. The word came out like a confession. She had the baby, a son. She gave him up for adoption and never told me. His name is Daniel and he's 18 years old and he wants to meet me. The engagement ring suddenly felt like it was burning her finger. Alina stared down at it, this symbol of their future that had been placed on her hand less than 30 minutes ago, and felt everything she'd believed about their life together crumble into dust. 18, she repeated numbly. You have an 18-year-old son. I didn't know, Lucian said desperately. Alina, I swear to you I had no idea. If I'd known, everything would have been different. You would have what? The question came out sharper than she intended. Married her? Raised him? Built the life with them that you just proposed building with me? I don't know, he admitted, and his honesty felt like another blow. Maybe. Probably. I don't know what I would have done, but I would have tried to do the right thing. Alina stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the city lights. Somewhere out there, in a hotel room, was a young man who was Lucian's firstborn son. A young man who had the right to know his father, to be part of whatever family Lucian built. Where are they now? She asked. Hotel near Central Park. Sophia said Daniel looks just like me. Same eyes, same. He trailed off, realizing how his words must sound to her. Same everything that Oliver doesn't have, Alina finished. Because Oliver isn't really yours, is he? Not biologically. He's Isabella's husband's son, and I'm just the woman who's been nursing him. That's not true, Lucian said fiercely, rising to face her. Oliver is my son in every way that matters. Biology doesn't change that. And you're not just anything. You're the woman I love, the woman I want to marry, the woman I want to build a life with. But there's another woman's son who has a legal claim to that life, Alina said, her voice breaking. There's an 18-year-old who's been looking for his father, who probably has questions and needs and expectations that I can't compete with. You're not competing with him. This isn't about competition. Alina laughed bitterly. Isn't it? Lucian, look at this from my perspective. I fell in love with you again partly because of how you loved Oliver, how you were willing to do anything to save him. But Oliver isn't your biological child, and I'm not his biological mother. We're both substitutes for what you really lost. You're not a substitute for anyone, Lucian said, crossing to her. You're the woman I've loved since I was 11 years old. Daniel's existence doesn't change that. It changes everything. The words exploded out of her with more force than she intended. It changes the story we've been telling ourselves about second chances and destined love. Maybe the reason you never found the right woman to marry, the right woman to have children with, is because your heart always knew there was already someone out there, a son you needed to find. That's not what this is. Then what is it? Alina demanded. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like the universe is telling us that we were deluding ourselves, that this perfect little family we built was never meant to be permanent. From the nursery, Oliver began to cry. Not his hungry cry or his sleepy fussing, but the distressed wail of a baby who could sense tension even through walls. Alina moved toward the sound automatically, but Lucian caught her arm. Don't, he said. Don't use Oliver as an excuse to run away from this conversation. I'm not running away, she said, pulling free. I'm taking care of the child who needs me right now, the child who doesn't have biological parents fighting over him. She went to Oliver, lifting him from his crib and holding him close as his cries subsided into hiccuping sobs. He was warm and solid in her arms, real and present and hers in all the ways that mattered. But for how long? If Daniel wanted a relationship with his father, if Lucian decided to prioritize the son he'd never known over the family they'd created from scratch, where would that leave her and Oliver? Lucian appeared in the nursery doorway, his face etched with pain and desperation. Allie, please don't do this. Don't let this news destroy what we've built. I'm not destroying anything, she said, rocking Oliver gently. I'm just finally seeing clearly. You have a biological son, Lucian, a 21-year-old young man who's been looking for his father. You have responsibilities to him that predate everything between us. I have responsibilities to you too, and to Oliver. Oliver will be fine, she said, though the words tasted like lies. He's healthy now. He's sleeping through the night. Any competent nanny could take over his care. I don't want a nanny. I want you. What you want and what's right aren't always the same thing. Alina kissed Oliver's forehead, breathing in the baby scent that had become as essential to her as oxygen. Daniel has the right to know his father. He has the right to your time, your attention, your love. I won't be the woman who stands in the way of that. You don't have to stand in the way of anything. There's room in our lives for Daniel and for us. Is there? Alina met his eyes across the small space of the nursery. Because I spent 18 years being someone's second choice. I won't do it again. Not even for you. The reference to her ex-husband hung between them, adding another layer of complexity to an already impossible situation. Lucienne knew about David, knew about the marriage that had slowly crumbled under the weight of emotional distance and competing priorities. You're not anyone's second choice, he said. You're my first choice, my only choice. Until an hour ago, Oliver was your only son, she replied. Now he's not. Things change, Luke. People's priorities change. Oliver had fallen back asleep in her arms, but Alina continued to hold him, drawing comfort from his peaceful weight. Tomorrow, everything would be different. Tomorrow, Lucian would meet the son he'd never known, and she would have to figure out where she and Oliver fit in a picture that had suddenly become much more complicated. Are you breaking up with me? Lucian asked quietly. Alina looked down at the engagement ring, its emerald fire dimmed in the soft nursery lighting. I'm giving you space to figure out what you really want, what you really need. Without the pressure of managing my feelings or protecting what we've built here, I don't need space, I know what I want. You think you know, she corrected. But you haven't met him yet. You haven't looked at your biological son and seen your own features reflected back at you. You haven't heard his voice, or learned his dreams, or discovered what kind of man he's become without you. She carefully placed Oliver back in his crib, her movements automatic, despite the chaos in her heart. When you do meet him, she continued, you might realize that this makeshift family we created was just a placeholder for something you were always meant to have. And what if you're wrong? Lucian asked. What if I meet Daniel and still want exactly what we have here? What if adding him to our family makes everything better, not worse? Alina paused in the doorway of the nursery, not turning to face him. Then you'll know where to find me, she said. But Luke, if you're going to choose us, make sure it's because you can't imagine your life any other way. Not because you feel obligated to honor a promise you made before you knew all the facts. As she walked past him toward their bedroom, her bedroom, she supposed now, Alina felt the weight of the ring on her finger like a reminder of how quickly happiness could transform into heartbreak. She'd learned to live with loss, but she'd never learned to live with being someone's consolation prize. And she wasn't about to start now. 2 days later, Lucian sat in the elegant lobby of the Marriott Hotel, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had turned white. He'd barely slept since Alina had quietly moved back to the upstairs apartment, taking only her clothes and leaving everything else, including the engagement ring, which she'd placed on his nightstand like a question mark. Oliver had been inconsolable the first night, crying for hours despite Lucian's attempts at comfort. The baby seemed to sense that his world had shifted, that the woman who'd been his primary caregiver for the past 8 months was suddenly maintaining careful distance. Mr. Thorne, Lucienne looked up to see a woman in her late 30s approaching, petite, with dark hair and kind eyes that looked familiar. Behind her stood a young man who made Lucienne's breath catch in his throat. Daniel was tall, probably 6'2", with the same dark hair and green eyes that Lucian saw in his own mirror every morning. The young man's, jaw was square and stubborn, his posture confident despite the obvious nervousness in his expression. He was wearing jeans and a simple button-down shirt, but he carried himself with an unconscious elegance that suggested good breeding and careful upbringing. Sophia, Lucian said, rising and extending his hand. You look well. Thank you for agreeing to meet us, she replied, then turned to the young man beside her. Daniel, this is your father. The word father hung in the air between them, loaded with 21 years of absence and a lifetime of questions. Daniel stepped forward, his green eyes studying Lucian's face with the intensity of someone memorizing every detail. You do look just like me, Lucian said, his voice rougher than intended. That's what everyone says, Daniel replied, his voice deeper than Lucian had expected, carrying a slight East Coast accent, though I think I got Mom's stubbornness. Despite the emotional weight of the moment, Lucian found himself almost smiling. Trust me, the stubbornness is definitely from my side of the family. They moved to a quiet corner of the lobby, settling into chairs that afforded them some privacy. The conversation that followed was stilted at first, filled with the awkwardness of two strangers trying to bridge a 21-year gap. But gradually, as Daniel began to talk about his adoptive family, his studies at Columbia University, his plans for law school, Lucian found himself genuinely impressed by the young man his son had become. The Andersons are good people, Daniel was saying about his adoptive parents. They never hid the fact that I was adopted, and they encouraged me to find you when I was ready. I needed to know where I came from, you know? I understand, Lucian said, and I'm sorry I wasn't there for you growing up. If I'd known, you would have done the right thing, Daniel finished. Mom told me. She said you were the kind of guy who would have married her and tried to make it work, even if you weren't ready to be a father. Lucian glanced at Sophia, who had the grace to look embarrassed. Your mother was right, I would have tried. But it might not have worked out, Daniel said with the wisdom of someone who'd clearly thought this through. You both were 18. You might have ended up divorced and bitter, and I might have grown up in a broken home instead of with the Andersons, who wanted me from day one. The maturity in his son's voice caught Lucien off guard. This wasn't a boy looking for a father figure or demanding explanations for abandonment. This was a young man who'd been loved and raised well, seeking connection rather than confrontation. What do you want from me? Lucian asked gently. I mean, what kind of relationship are you hoping for? Daniel was quiet for a moment, considering. Honestly, I'd like to get to know you. Maybe have dinner sometimes, talk about family history, understand where certain traits come from. I'm not looking for a father in the traditional sense. Dad Anderson filled that role. But I'd like to have you in my life if you're open to it. The simplicity of the request was both relief and heartbreak. No demands for financial support, no anger about missed birthdays or graduations, no expectations that couldn't be met, just a young man wanting to know his biological father. I'd like that too, Lucian said, meaning it, very much. They talked for another hour, sharing stories and beginning the delicate process of building a relationship from scratch. When it was time to leave, Daniel stood and extended his hand again. Thank you for meeting me, he said. I know this must be overwhelming. It is, Lucian admitted, but in a good way. You're an extraordinary young man, Daniel. Your parents, both sets, should be proud. As Sophia and Daniel walked away, Lucian remained in the lobby, processing everything he'd learned. His son was intelligent, well-adjusted, and genuinely likable, the kind of young man any father would be proud to claim. But he was also clearly independent, secure in his identity, and not looking to upend anyone's life, which meant Lucian had a choice to make. He could pursue a relationship with Daniel while also fighting for the family he'd built with Alina and Oliver, or he could let Alina's fears drive them apart, losing both the woman he loved and the child he'd raised as his own, because he was afraid to ask for what he really wanted. By the time Lucian returned to his penthouse, he knew what he had to do. He found Alina in the upstairs apartment, folding baby clothes with mechanical precision, while Oliver napped in a portable crib nearby. She looked up when he entered, her amber eyes guarded but hopeful. How did it go? She asked quietly. He's incredible, Lucian said, settling into the chair across from her. Smart, mature, well-raised. Everything I would have wanted in a son. He watched her face carefully, saw the flicker of pain that crossed her features before she masked it with polite interest. I'm glad, she said. He deserves to know his father. Alina, look at me. When she met his eyes, he leaned forward, his expression intense. I met my biological son today, and I'm grateful for the chance to build a relationship with him. But he's not looking to replace the family he has, and I'm not looking to replace the family I have. What does that mean? It means Daniel Anderson is a wonderful young man, who I hope to see for dinner once a month and talk to on holidays. But Oliver Thorne is my son, the boy I've raised from birth, the child whose first word will probably be Mama Alina, because you're the only mother he's ever known. Alina's hand stilled on the tiny shirt she was folding. Luke, I'm not done, he continued. Daniel has loving parents and a full life that doesn't depend on me, but Oliver has us, and we have each other, and that's not a consolation prize or a substitute for anything. It's exactly what I want. Even knowing that there's someone else out there who shares your DNA, especially knowing that. Lucian moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Do you know what I realized today? Biology doesn't make a family. Choice does. Love does. Showing up every day does. And I choose you, Alina. I choose Oliver. I choose this life we've built together. Tears were streaming down her face now, but she didn't pull her hands away. What if Daniel needs more from you? What if his circumstances change? Then we'll figure it out together, Lucian said firmly. As a family. Because that's what families do. They adapt, they grow, they make room for love in all its forms. I'm scared, she whispered. So am I. but I'm more scared of losing you than I am of facing whatever complications might come. Marry me, Alina. Not because it's convenient or because Oliver needs stability, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it." She was quiet for so long that Lucian's heart began to race with the fear that he'd lost her anyway. But then she reached into her pocket and pulled out his grandmother's ring, the emerald catching the afternoon light streaming through the windows. "Put it back on," she said, holding out her left hand. "Put it back on, and promise me we'll face whatever comes next together." As Lucian slipped the ring onto her finger for the second time, he felt something settle into place in his chest, a certainty that had nothing to do with biology or obligation, and everything to do with choice. "Together," he promised, sealing it with a kiss that tasted like second chances and stubborn love. From his crib, Oliver stirred and made the soft sounds that meant he was waking up hungry. But for the first time in days, both his parents were there to answer his call. 5 years later, the autumn sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Thorne family home in the Hamptons, casting golden rectangles across the hardwood floors where toys were scattered in the organized chaos that comes with raising young children. Alina stood in the kitchen, her hair now shorter and touched with honey highlights, wearing a cream sweater that complemented the engagement ring she'd never removed again. 5 years. 5 years since that terrifying night when everything had almost fallen apart, and sometimes Alina still marveled at how wrong her fears had been. "Mama, Oliver won't share the blocks," came an indignant voice from the living room. Alina smiled, wiping her hands on a dish towel as she went to mediate the dispute between her 3-year-old daughter Emma Rose and her now 6-year-old son Oliver, whose dark curls were getting more unruly by the day. "Oliver, sweetheart, what do we say about sharing?" she asked, settling onto the floor between her children. "That Emma's too little to build proper towers anyway?" Oliver replied with the logic of a 6-year-old, earning a shriek of protest from his sister. "Oliver Thorne, you know better than that," came Lucian's voice from the doorway. He was carrying their 18-month-old son, James, who was fighting sleep despite his obvious exhaustion. Lucian looked tired too. Not the bone-deep exhaustion of early grief, but the satisfied tiredness of a man who'd been up since dawn playing with his children. "Daddy!" Emma launched herself at Lucian's legs, nearly toppling him as James finally surrendered to sleep against his father's shoulder. "Careful, princess," Lucian murmured, adjusting his hold on the toddler. "Your brother just went down." The sight of her husband managing 3 children with practiced ease still made Alina's heart flutter. Fatherhood had transformed Lucien in ways she couldn't have imagined, made him more patient, more present, more willing to let business calls go to voicemail in favor of bedtime stories and playground adventures. "Daniel's coming for dinner tonight," she reminded him, as he carefully transferred James to his playpen. "He said he has news to share." "Good news, I hope," Lucian said, settling onto the floor beside Oliver and immediately being recruited to help build an elaborate block castle that would undoubtedly be destroyed by Emma within minutes. Daniel had become a regular fixture in their lives over the past 5 years, though in a way that complemented rather than complicated their family dynamic. He called Lucien Luke rather than Dad, came for monthly dinners, and sent thoughtful gifts on birthdays and holidays. Now 26 and a successful attorney at a prestigious Manhattan firm, he'd found his own path while maintaining the connection they'd built. More importantly, he'd become a beloved uncle figure to Oliver, Emma, and James, someone who could play elaborate games and give piggyback rides without the responsibility of daily discipline and bedtime routines. "He's probably going to tell us he's finally proposing to Rebecca," Alina said, referring to the brilliant pediatric surgeon Daniel had been dating for 2 years. "I saw the way he was looking at engagement rings when we went shopping last month." "About time," Lucian replied, helping Oliver place a particularly precarious block on top of their tower. "Though I'm not sure Rebecca knows what she's getting into, marrying into this family. This wonderful, chaotic, perfect family," Alina corrected, settling onto the floor beside him and automatically pulling Emma onto her lap. It was true. Their life was wonderfully chaotic. Between Oliver's soccer games and Emma's dance classes, James's unpredictable nap schedule and Daniel's monthly visits, the quiet, grief-stricken penthouse of 5 years ago felt like a different lifetime. They'd moved to the Hamptons house 2 years ago, when city life with 3 small children had become more overwhelming than romantic. Lucian commuted to the city 3 days a week now, working from home the other 2 days, and prioritizing family time in ways that would have shocked his younger, work-obsessed self. "Mama," Emma said, settling more comfortably in Alina's lap, "tell me the story about when you and Daddy were little." It was Emma's favorite bedtime story, the tale of the little boy and little girl who were best friends, lost each other, and found each other again when they both needed it most. Alina had adapted it for young ears, focusing on the friendship and adventure, rather than the grief and loss that had brought them back together. Well, Alina began, once upon a time there was a little boy named Luke who lived next door to a little girl named Allie. As she told the familiar story, Lucian watched his wife and daughter with the kind of contentment that had snuck up on him gradually over the years. He'd expected happiness to feel more dramatic, more like the intense emotion of their early romance. Instead, it felt like this: quiet moments on autumn afternoons, the sound of children's laughter, the easy intimacy of a woman who knew all his stories and loved him anyway. "And they lived happily ever after?" Emma prompted, even though she knew how the story ended. "They lived lovingly ever after," Alina corrected gently, a phrase she'd started using when Emma had asked why stories always ended with happiness instead of love. "Because sometimes life is sad or scary or difficult, but if you have love you can get through anything. Like when James was sick last month," Oliver asked, referring to a bout of pneumonia that had terrified them all. "Exactly like that," Lucian said, reaching over to ruffle Oliver's hair. "We were scared, but we took care of each other and everything turned out fine. Because we're a family," Emma said with the certainty of a 3-year-old who'd never known anything but security and love. "Because we're a family," Alina agreed, meeting Lucian's eyes over their daughter's head. Later that evening, after Daniel had indeed announced his engagement to Rebecca, after the children were finally asleep, after the dishes were done and the toys were picked up, Lucienne and Alina found themselves on the back porch, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the stars appear in the clear autumn sky. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Alina asked, settling into the crook of his arm on the porch swing they'd installed the previous summer. "Different how? If Daniel had found you earlier, if Sophia had told you the truth from the beginning, if we'd never lost Isabella and Emma, if any of the painful things hadn't happened." Lucian considered the question seriously, as he always did when Alina ventured into philosophical territory. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but then I think about Emma Rose in there, who wouldn't exist if we hadn't gone through everything we went through. Or James, who's exactly the baby we needed when we were ready for him. Or even Oliver, who might not have survived if you hadn't been broken in exactly the right way to heal him. You think our pain served a purpose? I think our pain taught us to recognize joy," he said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I think it taught us not to take any of this for granted." Alina was quiet for a moment, listening to the distant sound of waves and the closer sound of James stirring briefly in his monitor, before settling back into sleep. "I have something to tell you," she said finally, her voice carrying a note that made Lucian shift to look at her face. "Good news or challenging news? Depends on how you feel about even more wonderful chaos," she said, smiling up at him with the same radiant expression that had stopped his heart in a hospital room 6 years ago. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed immediately by joy so intense it made his chest ache. "Really? Really? I found out this morning. I wanted to wait until Daniel's dinner was over to tell you." "How far along?" 8 weeks, maybe 9. "I see Dr. Martinez on Thursday." Lucian pulled her closer, burying his face in her hair and breathing in the scent that had become home to him. Another baby. Another chance to witness the miracle of love creating life, of a family expanding to make room for one more heart. "Are you happy?" Alina asked, though his expression had already answered her question. "I'm terrified," he admitted. 4 kids, Allie. We're going to be outnumbered. But happy, he confirmed, sealing it with a kiss that tasted like wine and promises, and the kind of love that grows stronger with every test it survives. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human joy and sorrow but somehow blessing it all the same. In the house behind them, 3 children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and wanted and cherished. And in the spring there would be 4. From loss had come love. From love had come family. From family had come the kind of happiness that didn't promise perfection, but promised presence, the commitment to show up for each other, day after day, in whatever circumstances life brought their way. It was, Alina thought as she settled more deeply into Lucian's embrace, exactly the kind of love story she'd dreamed of as a little girl hiding in rose gardens and building impossible tree houses with her best friend. Some dreams, it turned out, were worth waiting 28 years to come true. Would you have made the same choice to fight for love despite the complications? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.